Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Climate Leadership Series. I'm Leanne Osborne, Strategy and Planning Manager at the Climate Registry. We are so excited to build off of the momentum of our recent kickoff event that took place 2 weeks ago, and certainly in the lead up to what we all hope is a significant and meaningful COP26 in Glasgow. The moment for climate action is now, and we are pleased to continue our climate leadership series into the fall with webinars and workshops that are designed to give sustainability professionals like you the tools to act and to meet ambitious climate goals and hopefully leave you feeling inspired. Today's series is focused on meeting corporate climate commitments and will dive deeper into nature-based solutions to climate change. We encourage you to participate in the conversation, to connect with your colleagues and submit questions for our panelists. Please use the chat function to the right of your screen. Next to chat, you can use the People tab to search for and connect with your colleagues. If you require assistance during the event, please email questions@climateleadershipconference.org. Today's sessions will be recorded. You can access the recordings and all of our Climate Leadership Series sessions on the CLC YouTube channel. A shared link is coming your way early next week via email. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Climate Leadership Conference, we have convened sustainability professionals for 10 years running to address today's pressing climate challenges through policy, innovation, and business solutions. Now I'm turning it over to my colleague, Amy Bailey at C2ES.
Hi, thanks, Leanne. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Bailey, the Director for Sustainability and Engagement at C2ES, the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. In partnership with the Climate Registry, we co-host the annual Climate Leadership Conference and Awards program, and we're pleased to keep the tradition alive, albeit virtually this year. So we thank you for joining us today. We are grateful for the support as well of our 2021 sponsors. I want to give special thanks to our headline sponsor, Bloomberg Philanthropies, our host city sponsor, Entergy, our platinum sponsor, Dominion, our gold sponsors, Intel and SoCal Gas. You can learn more about the great work these organizations are doing to support climate action by visiting the exhibit hall after our sessions conclude today. I now have the pleasure of introducing our first speakers. Lisa Jackson, the Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives at Apple, will join her fellow former EPA colleague and our former C2ES President and now Senior Advisor, Bob Perciasepe, in conversation about Apple's own climate commitments. So welcome, Bob and Lisa. I'll tee it over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Amy. Lisa, it's great to see you across the country. Here in Brooklyn, you're there in Cupertino. Let me just say a few more words about you, and then we can get into our conversation. Lisa, you probably remember that the first time you and I met was at a state-of-the-art recycling center in Carteret, New Jersey.
That's right.
And even now, you're looking at materials management at Apple in a big way. And we both worked together, and I had the honor of being your deputy for the first term of the Obama administration. I'm not going to go into the long list of things we did, but I have a few memories that's worth mentioning, like late nights working on regulations before court-ordered deadlines, all the way to getting up really early in the morning to worry about an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. These were pretty crazy, but also a really amazing work, I think, that you led and helped people like myself grow in terms of building inclusiveness in the work that EPA does. And so I really appreciated that. So let's get on with our conversation. And it's really great to have you join us today. Thanks, Lisa, for coming.
Oh, look, it's my pleasure, but give me a second to acknowledge your role as administrator of the EPA, an organization we both love, came up in many ways, and I learned so much from you. You're humble as always, but your leadership and your willingness to go toe-to-toe on really important issues as administrator and, of course, as deputy, but on your own, and the accomplishments you made have protected human health and the environment for this country and around the world. So thank you, Bob. It's so good to see you.
Thanks, Lisa. Now, in your new role, at not so new anymore, at Apple, you've been working really hard on many issues that are related to your entire career, all the way back to your studies at Tulane and Princeton. So, and I want to throw in a quick congrats on once again being in the top 50 influential women in business on Fortune magazine. So, see, I can never do that.
That's true.
So, you know, we have Glasgow coming up, the conference of parties of the Rio Convention that Amy mentioned, and you know, in the lead up to that, Apple has been doing a lot of work. But even before that, Apple has made the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030. And so making major leaps in the near term on that is something that you guys recently announced. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you guys are doing in that regard, because it involves supply chain as well as the communities you're working in.
Yeah, we had an announcement just yesterday that actually makes me so proud because, you know, in order for us to see the kind of transition we need to see, it can't just be big companies. It actually can't just be companies. And we've been struggling for ways to make sure that this transition is as broad as it is deep, right? And so on the one hand, what we know we can do and have done is work with our supply chain to get them to switch over to renewable energy for their Apple production. Actually, many of them switch over to renewable energy, period. But what we work with them on is the work they do for us and the products they produce for Apple. So we're up to 175 suppliers now who have committed. That's over 9 gigawatts of clean energy coming on grids around the world, 24 countries, to supply their needs, because we want it to be additional clean energy. We don't just want to purchase existing megawatts or kilowatt hours that are already clean, because then you're just taking clean energy off the grid and there's no more for other people to use. And so we're really proud of that program. I think what's cool about it is that companies are, eager to sign up, more than double the amount of companies, another 100 over the past year, and they're big and small. And that's exactly the kind of thing we have to keep driving. It can't just be the sort of largest companies. We all have to work in our supply chain. So that's number one. But then number two is one that I know you'll love, Bob, because it's the kind of thing it used to make the everyday work so great. And we call it Power for Impact. But the idea was we have small loads around the world where we could certainly go in and purchase renewable energy. But we like to also add energy to grids. So we try to add those small loads in places and at locations where they can have a huge impact in a community. So a school, a hospital, a place where the community can come and see storage or solar panels and understand and maybe learn. One of them is a school for sustainability. But, in places where we have small loads like Nigeria, South Africa, Colombia, we have 10 Power for Impact projects. And I like that because we've been searching to ensure that the work we do also builds some equity and climate justice into it. And this is our first attempt at these 10 projects where we're meeting our load needs by meeting community needs at the very same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just hit all the key points there. Not only is it Apple as the company, but the people that supply you and the places where you work. And that is that holistic look at that kind of global responsibility. And it's great that you guys are announcing and putting those forward in advance of the Glasgow Conference of Parties coming up. give me, how about an example of something you're, in addition to power, is there other things in terms of materials that you might be working on in the supply chain?
Well, you're right. I've never gotten far away from materials. I started as an old super fun recycling, materials management. That was how I started at EPA. And so what that translates to for us at Apple is we are hardware manufacturers. I remember saying to you when I joined, one of the things I like about Apple is we make things. It is not just a virtual in the cloud company. And that gives us a chance to really practice the circular economy, this idea that the Earth's resources are limited, that especially for certain materials like rare earth elements, what makes rare earth elements rare is that they're in the crust of the Earth, but they're at very small concentrations. So you have to churn a lot of material in order to get small amounts of these elements, and they're needed for electronics. And so we're just really proud that, for instance, 100% of the rare earth elements in our new iPhone models are recycled. So we're not drawing on the Earth's resources. That helps to lower the carbon footprint of the new models, but it also really lowers the water footprint and sort of the material carrying capacity of that phone, right? So we've committed to the circular economy. Tim Cook, our CEO, committed that one day, we did not put a date on this one. We have 2030 for carbon neutral for our supply chain and our customers and our products. But he says, one day I want to make all of our new products out of recycled or renewable materials. So we're not having to pull virgin material from the earth or out of communities. I will just say, we know that there's a correlation. It's not always direct, but the new iPhone 13 Pro has 11% reduction in its carbon footprint, in part due to the use of recycled materials, because we don't have to count smelting and all the material transport. The new 16-inch MacBook Pro is 8% down from previous generations. So we know that we see that climate connection, but we also know it's the right thing to do just from a resource efficiency perspective as well.
Yeah, I think that that's a lesson for everyone, because virtually any industry that makes things or uses things, and has a supply chain for those things, from plastics to metals, there's a huge opportunity to reduce the environmental impact and the carbon footprint by reusing materials that we've taken out. So let's transition here a little bit from Apple for a moment, and your thoughts, Lisa, on these broader trends that we were just touching on in the entire industrial and business sector in the world, and the role that businesses can be playing and are playing in helping motivate and move governments and the world toward that sustainable future and lower carbon future.
Yeah, we lobby and advocate alongside our suppliers around the world. We have to. When we're outside of the United States, we're in markets like Japan or Vietnam, and we're saying, hey, if you want to get more of our business, we'll go with you to your government to say, hey, we need to be able to have more clean energy on grid so that our suppliers can access it. Give us a way to add clean energy to the grid that makes economic sense, because clean energy is cheaper. It's just, if you put too much administrative hooks and ornaments on it, then it becomes more expensive. So we advocate a lot for clean energy. We advocate in this country we were the first company to come out for the clean energy standard, which sort of morphed into the pieces of the Buy Back Better plan that everybody's talking about as we speak here this very minute. And we've said for over 2 years now that we think we need to have a way for the economy to price carbon so that business can get engaged in this fight in a real way. In the absence of those things, because I know that we may be facing a future that's not going to have all the pieces right now, it's more important than ever that businesses step up to the plate. We're trying to do everything we know how to not just green ourselves, but to green our supply chain and help our customers access clean energy. And we'll keep doing that. And I think I get a lot of questions about green efforts where the words don't match the deeds, or where the deeds don't match the words. And I think that's where the role of the climate registry and C2ES is so important, because you can help people understand what are real efforts and what are less real efforts, I would say.
Yeah, and you mentioned the work that you're doing in the communities around the world that you're working on in your 10 projects. What do you think might come from some of that can be learned by other companies in terms of, or the private sector in general, about the communities they work in and their need for resilience and attention due to their potential for disproportionate impacts due to climate change?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important. I don't want to say that other companies aren't doing great work. Of course they are. So mostly I should talk about us. But what I love about these projects is that we tied the need to address climate change, which for many communities feels like something either far off or happens in the developed world, happens in the US, happens in Europe. And it's a problem created and solutions created for the US and Europe, maybe a few other locations around the globe, not to list every one. What we're trying to say is, the solutions that we're trying to impact are actually great solutions for communities who want to embrace them. How do we bring these solutions to life in Colombia? How do we bring them to life in parts of Africa, so that people see what they see on their everyday ledger is, oh, wow, we now have a school that is running and can take more students because they don't have to pay for energy, which is super expensive. That's a real tangible benefit to addressing climate change that goes beyond the big benefit of 1.5 degrees C, or addressing, changing water and hydrology patterns. I want to bring up one other, because I know you're going to talk about natural solutions. I don't want us to leave that out. We have another wonderful project we announced last year in Colombia. We do it in partnership with Conservation International. It's a 27,000 acre mangrove forest that we're working to preserve on the Zapata Bay, on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. And I love that project because on the face of it, we're looking at the stored carbon, the negative carbon that we get from preserving that, but what Conservation International calls blue carbon in those mangroves. But the community is looking at resilience. We got to engage the local groups in the restoration of those mangrove forests. And that protects their livelihoods, because many of them make their living in those mangrove forests as fishermen. And so I think every business can look at its need for clean energy around the world and say, how do I connect my need for clean energy with community solutions? And then I think it's a wonderful story. Of course, we all love wonderful stories in business, but it's a wonderful result that connects climate change solutions to community in a really tangible way.
Yeah, our next panel that's going to follow us here is going to talk a little bit more about the natural solutions. But let's, you brought it in here, and let's keep talking about it a little bit, because I think, when you look at aviation all the way to your own company, getting rid of all impacts is going to be difficult. And so the question is, how can you enhance the absorption of carbon out of the atmosphere? The Paris Agreement says bring into balance the anthropogenic emissions and the sinks, with to get a net zero. I mean, that's the actual words of the Paris Agreement. It doesn't talk about any particular kind of energy source or anything else. And so, how do you see that working in your own plans? I mean, how do you see the nature? Here's where I think the big idea could be: the nature-based solutions, preserving habitat and building resilient communities, and at the same time helping, bring that balance of sources and sinks. How do you see that working, in the Apple plan?
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you. So we estimate we have a plan to get us to 2030. It's called Apple 2030. Inside the company, it's a big deal. We check in on it regularly and report on it with the big boss quite regularly as well. But we estimate 75% of getting to carbon neutral will come through emissions reductions. But 25%, at least as we sit here today, and it is associated with things like logistics. There's also some direct emissions of CO2 in industrial processes, not related to energy use, but greenhouse gases are emitted as part of the process that at least today we don't have an alternative. So say 25% of our footprint, which is 24 million metric tons a year, we are going to need to offset, at least sitting here today in 2021. And so what we've also done is something that we call the Restore Fund. We said, why don't we try to pilot an investment vehicle where a company like ours can invest in a financial fund that pays returns in two ways. The first is the standard way. The fund makes money. So if I put in $1, I get more than $1 out. But the second way is it also has to provide a carbon sink. It has to provide a return in the form of carbon that's stored in nature. So it's nature-based. Right now, the Restore Fund has been focused on working forests, not forests that become parks and beautiful natural spaces like you've worked on so much of your career, but actual working forests, because we need growing trees and lumber and wood products. Those are all ways to sequester carbon out of the air. Trees take carbon out of the air as they grow. We can count that as part of our offsets for emissions that we can't cut down. But the idea was if we can make it profitable financially, then everyone would want to do this. Yeah. If I could get a return for doing it, wouldn't everyone? And the last piece is what you brought up, Bob. It can't just be profitable plus carbon negative. It has to be community positive. Right. So there's lots of worry today about indigenous people whose lands could easily, as part of carbon solutions, be taken away from them, away from their control. And so we're very clear with our partners who manage the fund that we want to see projects that are community positive. And that's Goldman Sachs, by the way. They are the manager of the actual fund. And that's, that means that there are projects we're going to have to turn down. And to be frank, right now, there aren't enough projects to invest in, because we would like to invest a lot more than 200 million, but we started small because we don't want to put money out there that we can't spend.
Yeah, no, that makes tons of sense, and everything you just said. So what do you see as some of the barriers here on this part of the plan, not just your plan, but probably the plan for carbon neutrality for the entire global economy? What barriers are you seeing, or solutions to make things go faster?
Yeah, two things we see so far. The first, of course, is data transparency and accurate numbers around carbon sequestration. I think this whole thing falls apart if people, investors, but also communities come to believe it's kind of built on smoke and mirrors. And so you need rigorous science. That's why we partnered with Conservation International. They're the other partner in the Restore Fund. So on the science side, we have their extraordinary talent out there making sure that these are real projects that are actually removing carbon that otherwise would not have been removed. So it's additive carbon removal. The other side, though, is scale. To find those wonderful projects requires extraordinarily dedicated conservationists, ecologists, scientists, in some cases extraordinarily brave ecologists and scientists who are out working in communities to help communities preserve and protect say a working forest or a grassland, or of course the next frontier will be agricultural land, which has a tremendous opportunity to sequester carbon. And so in order to get the projects that we love done the right way, to have more mangrove projects, which we're so positive about, we need scale. And so one of the reasons we put the $200 million fund together, and I think hopefully others will do similar, is it's supposed to be a strong signal to the marketplace to go out and create these kinds of projects. The danger is if another company comes along and isn't rigorous about the carbon removal, isn't rigorous about community enhancement, you could have a lot of money going towards projects that aren't either aren't viable, aren't good, or create injustice along the way. And those to me are the three biggest dangers, if you will, of doing this incorrectly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if there's going to be private capital flowing into these nature-based solutions, there has to be confidence, and so that's a key. And I hope some of the work that you guys are doing will help build the body of knowledge with organizations like Conservation International and others, including your own technical people. I wouldn't say that Apple is not technically astute. To help move the ball forward. This is going to be a subject among many of our next panel. One final question before we have to get off. We have a couple more minutes here. Lisa, have you been paying attention to Glasgow in your role and keeping the rest of the leadership team there informed on what you think, what might be happening, and if you have any thoughts on this another pivotal moment, in the march forward to get the world to address climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's telling tales out of school that literally this morning, right before this call, I walked in and talked to my boss, the CEO, about what happened overnight in Washington, D.C. Because, of course, what happens in D.C. is what the president and envoy Kerry and bring into Glasgow for our country. And he wanted to know where we are. For a while, we were hearing that, business might be the best news that was going into Glasgow from the U.S. side. I think that's potentially changing quickly, and that's great. But yeah, we care. I'll tell you, like, the most immediate, most easy way to make that connection from my standpoint, where I sit today, not where we sat 9 years ago or 10 years ago, where we've been a very different. I'm still remembering going to Copenhagen and making the endangerment finding, Bob. I mean, that's probably one of the highest points of our career, right? But sorry to digress. But
that's okay.
Back to Apple. We have made a commitment that we want all of our customers to be carbon neutral by 2030 when they use our products. We would greatly prefer that the way our customers get there is by plugging into clean grids around the world. So the more work that government leaders do to really push our grids to be cleaner, the less work business has to do on something that, frankly, is the hardest for us to do. We love working with our customers, but they deserve the same access to clean energy that we get every day. We can plug into it. And so we care a lot about watching what happens with the grid over the next 10 years, because we've made this commitment, and it's a lot easier to meet with clean electricity coming on around the world.
Well, we'll see what happens, and hopefully there's a little bit of momentum out of Washington, although it's been hard to come by, and so we'll all keep an eye on that. So Lisa, I'm hoping, when you and I started talking about having this conversation, we were hoping we'd be together in New Orleans, your hometown.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that sometime in the next year we'll be able to catch up as perhaps we get more people vaccinated and we can move forward. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for everything you've done before and now with Apple, and keep up the good work. And I'm now going to turn this over to Jen Kaminsky, who will lead us into the next session.